Hello, and welcome back to Ask a News Worker. Today we're going to be talking about coverage. We're going to be talking about news coverage. What is news coverage? News coverage is what news organizations have decided is worth covering. That's why it's called news coverage. News organizations collectively decide what they are going to write about, publish about, make videos about, what they are going to create news content about. That is what news coverage is. That's what news coverage comprises. How do news organizations decide how something gets covered or what gets covered in the first place? Well, that will really depend on the organization and the people within. It's actually quite a mysterious process sometimes. Sometimes it's obvious, an elected official, president, a prime minister, leader of a region or country or a company, famous person, those people get coverage because they've already been covered before. Coverage begets more coverage, typically speaking. But beyond that, beyond established important people, let's call them that, established officials, things of that nature, how is coverage decided? Well, once again, it really depends on the organization, it really depends on the people involved. It can be a mysterious process. Sometimes it's decided through the results of something that's trending on social media. Social media plays a big role in where coverage goes, where coverage extends to. Coverage is a sort of spotlight, I would say. It's a spotlight on something in particular, something that's happening. Just because something isn't being covered doesn't mean it's not happening. There's a lot of people who seem to think that because something is not in the news, because something is not getting news coverage, it must not be taking place anywhere, or that it must be over. I remember someone I know who I guess wasn't following the news as closely as I was as a news worker, who was under the impression in, say, the late 2000s, early 2010s, that the situation in Iraq was fine or over because they simply hadn't come across much news coverage about it. So he was under the impression that everything was okay there. Meanwhile, I was seeing reports of attacks and suicide bombings and things that would eventually lead to the emergence of ISIS, as they came to be known, or ISIL or Daesh, many different words for that. So this person thought that because there wasn't coverage of Iraq, at least in the outlets that he was seeing, that Iraq was fine. But once again, just because something isn't being covered or covered very closely doesn't mean nothing is happening. Coverage is a sort of spotlight that illuminates what's happening in a certain area. It's people writing about an area, reporting on an area, finding out what's going on there. If no one is doing that, life still goes on in that area. Things still happen. Occurrences take place. They're just not getting much coverage. And as a result, people don't know what's going on. There are many areas around the world that are considered dark zones by people in the press, by journalistic types, because there's just simply not much reportage, much coverage of what's going on there. If a news outlet isn't covering what's going on in a certain area, then it's very likely that the world will not know what is happening there. Only the locals will know. I mean, you, the viewer yourself, might have a situation where you live in a part of the world where you know what's going on locally quite well. You have an understanding of the local situation, be it good, be it bad, but it's not being written about in any news outlet or published about because they're not covering it. So again, coverage is what leads the rest of the world to know what is happening in a specific place. Coverage conveys importance as well. When something is covered, there's this assumption that it must be important. Why would a news organization cover something unless it wasn't important? Well, that can be tricky too, because I think we've all come across stories where we thought, why is this being reported on? Why is this being covered? This doesn't mean much to me. This doesn't seem terribly significant in the long run. I don't know how coverage of this particular topic or issue really helps society or helps humanity, but they're going with it anyways. So coverage does convey a certain amount of importance. People by default think that something matters because it's being covered, but the news, once again, has its own priorities, its own agenda, its own interests. Something might be getting coverage simply because people within the news organization think it should. But people outside the news organization might not agree. They might not care about the coverage. They might not watch it or read it or listen to it. But because the people in the news organization have decided to cover it, it becomes news. So coverage is how things become news in part. Coverage is what determines what the news actually is. Does the average person have any say in what coverage will be and what the news will cover? Not really. I don't know of many situations where the public has, say, successfully contacted a major media institution and said, hey, I would really appreciate it if maybe you wrote about this or you published about this. This is something that means something to me. This is something that concerns me. If the news organization in question doesn't agree that something is significant, it will not get coverage. The news organization decides what is important, and the news, as a result, is the manifestation of that preference, of that belief. The only things that get coverage are the things that news organizations deem worthy of coverage. And if the thing you care about is not deemed worthy of coverage by them, it will not get covered. You can cover it. You could start your own small media organization. Anyone can do it if you live in a free-ish country. If you live in a country with a free press, you can start your own media organization, your own newspaper, or your own online news outlet is more likely what people do these days in 2022. You can do it. But even then, you're not going to have the same circulation as a big media outlet like the New York Times or the Associated Press, Washington Post, The Guardian in the UK, the Globe and Mail in Canada. These papers have wide reach. That's another term that you'll hear in the media business. Reach. They have reach. They can reach a lot of people. If you've got a news website that your friends read, your family checks out, and not many other people, then you don't have wide reach. You don't have wide circulation. You want your material to get into a big media outlet, a big media circulation center of some sort so that it reaches more people. You want your coverage to reach more people. But again, coverage is a subjective determination that will vary from organization to organization. And if a member of the public wants the media to cover something, the best way to do it, from what I can tell and from what others have suggested in books and essays I've read about this sort of thing, is that you have to somehow get the attention of the media. You have to do something in public that makes the media think you're worth covering suddenly. That's why people often do outlandish things to draw attention to whatever it is they're concerned about, whatever issue they're motivated towards, because there's really no other way sometimes to get the media to cover the thing that you're concerned about, the thing you're interested in. That's why you'll see a lot of extravagant demonstrations and sort of stunts, I guess, pulled in public that are eye-grabbing, eye-catching, because the press will write about that. If you send an email to a news organization saying, hey, I'm very concerned about this issue, can you write about this, please? You probably won't get anywhere. Realistically speaking, I'm sorry, but that you probably won't get anywhere. You sort of have to go into public and do something eye-catching, hopefully not illegal. I'm not recommending anyone do anything illegal, but that's typically how coverage is obtained and achieved. And is that good? Is that bad? That's a separate issue. But people don't generally get coverage for the things they care about unless they get the media's attention somehow by doing something perhaps outrageous, perhaps preposterous. That's really the only way it happens. That's really the only way that the media starts to care about something. They're always looking for something kind of flaring up somewhere, hopefully not literally on fire, but they're looking for commotion, attention. That's what attracts a lot of news organizations to cover something in the first place. So how is coverage established? Many different ways, but it starts with the people within the news organization. They have to care about it. Something will not become news unless the news workers involved decide this is worth writing about. This is worth covering. There are lots of things all the time that don't get covered. They're happening, but news organizations say, we don't care enough to cover this. We don't want to devote the resources to it. They've only got so many people. They've only got so much time and money. You know, a reporter has to be flown around to a certain place, has to be put up in a hotel, has to be given resources. They don't want to do that for everything. So unfortunately, there are a lot of significant, important, crucial things that never get covered because news organizations have decided it's just not worth it for them. And that's not great, but that is the reality on the ground. That is the reality of the situation. What do you think? Do you think news organizations should do more to expand their coverage? Do you think they should get more input from the public? How do you think a healthy relationship between the press and the public should look? That's a very important question that we could devote a whole other series of videos to. But for now, we're going to leave it there. Thanks again for watching Ask a Newsworker. Like and subscribe. All that.